Antonio DeLuca stood in the middle of a crowded hospital corridor, staring through the glass window of an intensive care room. Machines beeped steadily. Snow drifted outside the Chicago skyline. And inside that hospital bed lay the woman he had publicly humiliated. The woman who should have hated him. The woman who had just taken a bullet meant for him. For the first time in years, one of the most feared and powerful men in Chicago felt completely helpless. His expensive suit was stained with blood. Her blood. The doctors had told him the next few hours were critical. Antonio barely heard them. Because only one thought kept repeating in his mind. Why? Why would Naomi Carter risk her life for a man who had destroyed her dignity in front of an entire city? A man who had told the world he didn't want her. A man who didn't deserve her forgiveness. Antonio pressed his hand against the cold glass. "Please survive," he whispered. It was the first honest prayer he had spoken in years. But if Naomi lived, would she ever forgive him? And if she didn't, could he survive losing the only woman who had ever made him question the life he had built? 3 months earlier, Chicago was dressed in autumn. Golden leaves scattered across sidewalks. Cold winds swept between towering buildings. The city moved fast. Always fast. But Naomi Carter often felt as though her life had become frozen in place. At 38 years old, she had become the person everyone relied upon. The dependable daughter. The responsible sister. The reliable employee. The woman who always showed up. The woman who never complained. Every morning she woke before dawn. She prepared breakfast for her mother before leaving for work. After work she handled her mother's medical appointments. Paid bills. Helped her younger sister whenever another financial emergency appeared. And somehow found enough energy to prepare for the next day. Everyone needed something from Naomi. Very few people asked what Naomi needed. Most nights she sat beside her apartment window overlooking the south side. A cup of tea cooling in her hands. Watching distant city lights. Watching couples walk together. Watching life happen for everyone except herself. Sometimes she wondered where her own story had gone. 7 years. That was how long she had spent building a future with Brian Matthews. 7 years of loyalty. Support. Sacrifice. She helped him launch his business. Worked overtime to cover expenses. Believed every promise he made. Then one ordinary afternoon she came home early. And found him in their apartment with another woman. The memory still hurt. Not because she missed Brian. She didn't. What hurt was realizing she had spent years investing in someone who never truly valued her. 3 months later he married the woman he'd cheated with. As if Naomi had never existed. As if 7 years meant nothing. That betrayal left scars no one could see. Scars that whispered dangerous things. You're not enough. You're easy to leave. No one chooses you. Over time she stopped arguing with those voices. Instead she focused on surviving. It felt safer. Safer than hope. Safer than love. Yet despite everything, Naomi remained kind. The elderly neighbor in her building adored her. Children at church followed her around like ducklings. Co-workers trusted her. Strangers often found themselves telling her things they had never told anyone else. There was warmth in Naomi. A quiet strength. The kind that emerged only after surviving heartbreak. The kind that made people feel safe. Everyone except Naomi seemed able to see it. Across the city, Antonio DeLuca stood inside his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. The sunrise painted the water gold. The view was worth millions. Antonio barely noticed it. At 45, he possessed everything society claimed should bring happiness. Money, power, influence, respect. His company generated hundreds of millions annually. Politicians attended his charity events. Business leaders sought his approval. Entire neighborhoods benefited from foundations he funded. From the outside, Antonio looked like a man living the dream. Inside, he felt exhausted. Every day brought another problem. Another threat. Another reminder that he had inherited a life he never wanted. 12 years earlier his father died suddenly. Antonio became head of the DeLuca organization overnight. A position built on fear, control, violence. He had spent years transforming the family empire into legitimate enterprises. Security companies, real estate investments, technology contracts, community development projects. But change created enemies. Many powerful men preferred the old ways. Some quietly plotted against him. Others openly challenged him. Antonio trusted almost nobody. Not because he enjoyed isolation. Because experience taught him caution. The last woman he loved had eventually left. Not for another man. For a better life. A safer life. She wanted marriage. Children. Normalcy. Antonio couldn't offer any of those things. Not while carrying the weight of an empire. When she walked away, he convinced himself it was for the best. Love complicated everything. Love created weakness. Love gave enemies leverage. Since then he built walls around his heart. Walls taller than the skyscrapers outside his windows. And then Naomi Carter appeared. The first time Antonio truly noticed her happened during a quarterly board meeting. She entered quietly. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to draw attention. Just a woman carrying folders. Professional. Focused. Confident. Antonio watched her organize materials while executives argued around the conference table. Most people changed when they entered a room with powerful men. They became nervous. Eager to impress. Careful with every word. Naomi didn't. She remained exactly the same. Calm. Efficient. Unaffected. It intrigued him. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Antonio found himself noticing small things. The way she remembered everyone's birthdays. The way she stayed late to help coworkers. The way she treated the janitor with the same respect she showed executives. The way she never used charm or manipulation to advance her career. In a world full of people chasing power, Naomi seemed different. Authentic. Antonio hated how often he thought about her. Because attraction was dangerous. Especially for a man like him. And Naomi deserved a life far away from the shadows surrounding his own. Unfortunately, not everyone shared that perspective. Antonio's uncle Vincent noticed. Vincent noticed everything. Especially things he could use. Unlike Antonio, Vincent embraced the old ways. He believed fear was strength. Compassion was weakness. And prejudice was simply common sense. The idea of Antonio becoming interested in Naomi disgusted him. At first he made jokes. Then sarcastic comments. Then increasingly direct criticisms. Antonio ignored him. Until one evening when everything exploded. The annual DeLuca Foundation Charity Gala attracted Chicago's elite. Politicians, business leaders, journalists, celebrities. Everyone attended. Antonio arrived already frustrated. A major contract was collapsing. Internal conflicts were escalating. Security threats had increased dramatically. His patience was gone. Then a reporter asked a simple question. "Mr. DeLuca, is Naomi Carter accompanying you tonight?" Several cameras turned. Vincent laughed loudly. The room suddenly felt smaller. Antonio reacted without thinking. Trying to crush rumors before they endangered Naomi. Trying to silence speculation. Trying to regain control. Instead, he made the biggest mistake of his life. "I don't want her because she's black." Silence. Absolute silence. Then he added the words that would haunt him forever. "I never did." The damage happened instantly. Reporters published headlines. Social media exploded. By sunrise, the entire city was talking. And Naomi was reading every word. Naomi stared at her phone. Again. And again. And again. Maybe she hoped the words would change. Maybe she hoped someone would explain. But the headlines remained the same. The comments remained the same. The humiliation remained the same. A familiar ache settled inside her chest. The same ache she felt when Brian betrayed her. The same ache she felt every time she questioned her worth. She had worked tirelessly for that company. Given everything professionally. And this was how she would be remembered. As the woman publicly rejected. The woman publicly dismissed. Tears threatened. She refused to let them fall. Instead, she opened her laptop. Typed a resignation letter. Printed it. Signed it. And quietly placed it on Antonio's desk the following morning. No speech. No confrontation. No anger. Just dignity. Then she walked away. She didn't know it yet. But that decision was about to change both their lives forever. And Antonio DeLuca was about to discover that some mistakes cannot be fixed with money. Some losses cannot be negotiated. And some women become unforgettable the moment they're gone. Before we continue this unforgettable romance, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. These stories are carefully crafted to bring you emotional journeys filled with love, healing, second chances, and unforgettable happy endings. If you enjoy mature romance stories that stay with you long after they end, subscribe now. And let's continue. Do you believe true love can appear when you least expect it? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Antonio DeLuca had faced hostile takeovers. He had negotiated with dangerous men. He had survived threats, betrayals, and attempted extortion. Yet somehow, none of those experiences prepared him for the sight of Naomi Carter's empty desk. For 3 weeks, he found reasons to walk past her office. The chair remained vacant. The computer sat dark. The small potted plant she had kept near the window was gone. The space looked lifeless. Like something important had been removed. Something he hadn't realized he depended on. At first, Antonio told himself it was simply inconvenience. Naomi had been exceptional at her job. Replacing her wouldn't be easy. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the real reason. The truth was far more uncomfortable. He missed her. Not just her work. Her presence. The quiet confidence she brought into every room. The way she made chaos seem manageable. The way she treated everyone with dignity. Even him. Especially him. Until he gave her a reason not to. One evening, after another 12-hour workday, Antonio found himself standing alone in his penthouse. The city glittered beyond the windows. Normally, the view calmed him. Tonight, it felt empty. His phone buzzed. A message from his longtime friend and security chief, Marco Ricci. "You need to move on." Antonio stared at the words. Then typed back. "I never even had her." For several moments, no reply came. Finally, Marco answered. "That's exactly the problem." Across Chicago, Naomi was learning how to breathe again. The community center wasn't glamorous. The building was old. The funding was limited. The hours were exhausting. But for the first time in years, her work felt meaningful. She helped struggling families find resources. Assisted teenagers applying for college scholarships. Organized food drives. Mentored young women navigating difficult circumstances. Every day reminded her that kindness still mattered. That people still mattered. And slowly, the humiliation she carried began to fade. Not completely. But enough. One snowy afternoon, a 16-year-old girl named Brianna lingered after a mentoring session. "You know something?" the teenager said. "What?" "I want to be like you someday." Naomi laughed softly. "No, you don't." "I do. Trust me. You can do much better." The girl shook her head. "You help everybody." Naomi looked away. The words touched something vulnerable inside her. Because lately she had begun realizing something important. She spent so much time helping everyone else that she forgot herself. Forgot her own dreams. Forgot her own happiness. Forgot that she deserved love too. The realization was uncomfortable. But necessary. For the first time in years, Naomi started wondering whether life might still hold something more. Something she hadn't given herself permission to want. 2 weeks later, fate intervened. Not dramatically. Not romantically. Just unexpectedly. Naomi stopped at a small bookstore downtown after work. Snow drifted outside. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. The atmosphere felt peaceful. Safe. She wandered through the fiction section, searching for something new to read. Then she froze. Antonio DeLuca stood 3 aisles away. For a moment, neither moved. Neither spoke. The silence stretched. Awkward. Uncomfortable. Antonio recovered first. "Naomi." His voice sounded careful. As though he feared she might disappear. She straightened. Professional instinct kicking in. "Mr. DeLuca." The formal response created immediate distance. Antonio felt it. Naomi intended it. "I'm surprised to see you here." She raised an eyebrow. People who work at community centers are allowed to read. A hint of humor. A hint of challenge. Antonio almost smiled. "Almost. You know that's not what I meant." "I know." Another silence. Neither seemed eager to leave. Which made things even more confusing. Finally Antonio spoke. "I owe you an apology." Naomi's expression hardened immediately. "No. No. No apology." Antonio blinked. "You don't want one?" She sighed. "No. Because apologies don't erase things." The words landed heavily. "I know. Do you?" For the first time, genuine pain crossed Antonio's face. And Naomi wasn't prepared for that. She expected arrogance. Defensiveness. Not regret. Real regret. The sight unsettled her more than anger ever could. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly. Naomi looked away. Because part of her believed him. And that was dangerous. Very dangerous. Chicago was buried beneath snow 3 nights later. Visibility was poor. Traffic crawled through icy streets. Most people hurried home. Naomi had just finished a late shift at the community center. She wrapped her coat tighter and headed toward the train station. That's when she noticed the black SUV. Antonio's vehicle. She recognized it immediately. The convoy slowed near a downtown parking structure. At first nothing seemed unusual. Then everything happened at once. A van appeared from nowhere. Gunfire erupted. Glass exploded. People screamed. Cars swerved. Chaos consumed the street. Naomi ducked behind a concrete barrier. Her heart pounded. The attack lasted seconds. Maybe less. Security personnel returned fire. One gunman fell. Another fled. Most witnesses focused on the street-level violence. Naomi didn't. Because from her position, she noticed something nobody else saw. A second shooter. Hidden above. On the parking structure rooftop. Waiting. Patient. His rifle pointed directly at Antonio. The security team hadn't spotted him. Antonio hadn't spotted him. Nobody had. Except Naomi. For one terrifying second, she froze. This wasn't her fight. This wasn't her responsibility. This was the man who humiliated her. The man who broke her trust. The man who shattered her pride. Then another thought surfaced. A simpler one. A human one. Someone is about to die. And suddenly nothing else mattered. Without thinking, Naomi ran. She ignored the screaming. Ignored the gunfire. Ignored common sense. Antonio had just emerged from the SUV. His attention focused on the street attack. He never saw the sniper. Never saw death approaching. Naomi did. And she ran faster. Antonio. Her voice vanished beneath the chaos. She pushed through panicked crowds. Through drifting snow. Through fear. The sniper adjusted his aim. Antonio finally looked up. Too late. Far too late. Naomi reached him first. With every ounce of strength she possessed, she shoved him sideways. The shot rang out. Pain exploded through her shoulder. White hot. Blinding. The world tilted violently. Antonio crashed onto the frozen pavement. Naomi fell beside him. Everything became distant. Muffled. Slow. People were shouting. Running. Moving. But all Naomi could see was Antonio's face. Shock. Fear. Horror. And something else. Something she'd never seen before. The realization that he might lose her. Naomi. His voice sounded broken. She tried to respond. Couldn't. Darkness crept into her vision. Snowflakes landed on her skin. Cold. Gentle. The last thing she felt before unconsciousness claimed her was Antonio's hand gripping hers desperately. As though letting go wasn't an option. As though she mattered. As though she always had. When Antonio arrived at the hospital, he refused to leave. Doctors argued. Security teams insisted he relocate. Marco demanded additional protection. Antonio ignored everyone. He remained outside Naomi's room for hours. Then through the night. Then through the following morning. The bullet had narrowly missed major arteries. The surgeons were optimistic. But recovery would take time. Antonio sat alone beside her hospital bed. Watching machines monitor her breathing. Watching her sleep. Watching the woman who had risked everything for him. A woman who owed him absolutely nothing. The guilt was unbearable. Because if she hadn't pushed him, he would be dead. And because if he had never spoken those cruel words, maybe she wouldn't have been there at all. Hours passed. Then suddenly Naomi stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. Antonio stood immediately. Relief flooding through him. For several seconds, she looked confused. Then she recognized him. And everything came rushing back. The attack. The bullet. The past. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Neither knew where to begin. Finally Antonio whispered the truth he should have said months ago. "I'm sorry." Naomi stared at him. Long. Silent. Searching. And for the first time since that disastrous gala, she saw something she never expected to find in Antonio DeLuca. Not power. Not control. Not pride. Vulnerability. Raw and undeniable. The kind that couldn't be faked. The kind that changed everything. But was it enough? Could one apology heal wounds that deep? Or was their story only becoming more complicated? The answer would change both of their lives forever. Have you ever met someone who completely changed your life when you weren't looking for love? Share your story below. For several seconds, neither Naomi nor Antonio spoke. The quiet hospital room seemed to hold its breath. Antonio stood beside her bed. A powerful man who suddenly looked nothing like the intimidating businessman Chicago knew. He looked tired. Older. Human. And strangely vulnerable. Naomi wasn't prepared for that. She had spent months imagining what she would say if she ever saw him again. None of those imaginary conversations involved Antonio looking at her as though her survival mattered more than his own. "I'm sorry," he repeated quietly. The words carried none of the confidence people associated with Antonio DeLuca. Only regret. Deep regret. Naomi swallowed. Her shoulder throbbed painfully. But that wasn't what hurt most. The memory of that gala still lived inside her. The humiliation. The headlines. The whispers. The feeling of becoming a public joke overnight. "You can't take it back." Antonio nodded. "I know." His honesty surprised her. Most people immediately defended themselves. Explained. Excused. Justified. Antonio didn't. He simply accepted responsibility. For the first time, Naomi wondered if the man she thought she knew was only part of the story. "What you said." Her voice trembled slightly. Antonio closed his eyes briefly. As if hearing those words physically hurt. "I know. You made me feel." She stopped. The old wounds suddenly felt too exposed. Too vulnerable. Antonio's voice softened. "Not enough?" Naomi stared at him. Because he had somehow found the exact words. The ones she never said aloud. The ones she barely admitted to herself. Something passed between them then. Not romance. Not yet. understanding. And understanding can sometimes be more intimate than attraction. 2 days later, Antonio finally told her everything. The real story. The truth he should have explained months ago. They sat alone in her hospital room. Snow fell outside the window. Chicago looked soft beneath winter's blanket. For once, neither of them wore emotional armor. Antonio stared at the city while he spoke. 3 weeks before the gala, we received information about a threat. Naomi frowned. What kind of threat? A kidnapping. Her eyes widened. Antonio continued. They weren't targeting me. The realization hit her instantly. They were targeting me? Antonio nodded. The room fell silent. Someone inside the organization believed I cared about you. Naomi struggled to process that. Antonio continued carefully. The rumors started spreading. And instead of correcting them, I panicked. He laughed bitterly. A 45-year-old man with hundreds of employees and millions of dollars panicked. Naomi looked down. You could have told me. I should have. Why didn't you? Antonio was quiet for several moments. Then he gave the most honest answer possible. Because I've spent most of my life believing that keeping people away protects them. Naomi slowly absorbed his words. The statement explained far more than he realized. It explained the loneliness, the isolation, the emotional distance. Antonio wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting everyone else. Even when it destroyed him. Especially when it destroyed him. For the first time, Naomi saw the burden he carried. And unexpectedly, her anger began to soften. Recovery took weeks. Because Antonio insisted on providing security, Naomi found herself spending more time with him than either expected. At first it felt awkward. Uncomfortable. Then gradually, something changed. They talked. Really talked. Not about business. Not about schedules. Not about work. About life. About family. About disappointment. About dreams they once abandoned. One evening Antonio visited her apartment building. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Robinson, immediately adored him. Which shocked everyone. Including Antonio. Especially Antonio. Mrs. Robinson sat him down and interrogated him over homemade peach cobbler. What are your intentions? Antonio nearly choked on his coffee. Naomi laughed so hard she cried. The sound stopped Antonio's heart for a moment. Because he realized something. He had never heard her laugh like that before. Free. Unrestricted. Joyful. The realization lingered long after he left. That night Antonio stood in his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. For the first time in years, the apartment didn't feel completely empty. Because thoughts of Naomi filled every room. And that terrified him. Naomi noticed the changes too. Antonio listened. Actually listened. He remembered details. Asked questions. Paid attention. Most importantly, he made her feel seen. Not as an employee. Not as a responsibility. Not as a symbol. As Naomi. The woman beneath everything else. One Saturday afternoon they walked through Millennium Park. Snow crunched beneath their boots. Children laughed nearby. The city felt strangely magical. Antonio bought hot chocolate from a street vendor. When he handed her the cup, their fingers brushed. Such a small touch. Yet both felt it. Neither mentioned it. Neither trusted it. The attraction growing between them felt dangerous. Not because it wasn't real. Because it was. Naomi hadn't allowed herself to feel this way in years. Antonio hadn't allowed himself to feel this way in even longer. Hope had entered the room. And hope can be terrifying when you've spent years preparing for disappointment. The following weeks became filled with moments. Small moments. Meaningful moments. The kind that slowly change everything. Antonio began visiting the community center. Officially, he was reviewing potential charitable partnerships. Unofficially, he wanted reasons to see Naomi. The children loved him. The staff respected him. Watching Antonio interact with struggling families revealed a side of him few people ever saw. Compassionate. Patient. Protective. One evening Naomi found him helping a teenage boy repair a broken bicycle. "You know how to do that?" Antonio smiled. "My father made sure I learned practical skills." The mention of his father darkened his expression. Naomi noticed immediately. What was he like? Antonio became very quiet. The silence itself provided the answer. Finally he said softly, "The kind of man I spend every day trying not to become." Naomi's chest tightened. Because she understood. Everyone carried ghosts. Everyone fought battles nobody else could see. And suddenly she wanted to ease his burden. The realization startled her. Because somewhere along the way, she had fallen in love. It happened unexpectedly. Like most important things. A winter storm knocked out power across part of the city. Antonio insisted on checking the community center personally. When he arrived, Naomi was helping distribute blankets and food. Hours later the storm intensified. Roads closed. Travel became impossible. They found themselves alone inside the quiet building. Candles flickered softly. Snow battered the windows. For once, there were no responsibilities. No interruptions. No audience. Just two people sitting beside each other. Talking. Listening. Feeling. Antonio looked at her. Really looked. And suddenly every wall he'd spent years building began to crack. "You saved my life." Naomi smiled gently. "We've discussed that." "No." His voice deepened. "You saved more than my life." Her breath caught. The air shifted. Something powerful moved between them. Neither could ignore it anymore. Antonio reached for her hand. Slowly. Giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their fingers intertwined. Warm. Certain. Real. Naomi. The way he said her name nearly broke her heart. Because nobody had ever spoken it like that. As if it mattered. As if she mattered. Antonio leaned closer. So slowly. So carefully. As though she were something precious. Their first kiss wasn't passionate. It wasn't desperate. It was something better. A promise. A beginning. A moment both had secretly waited for. And when they finally pulled apart, neither could stop smiling. For one beautiful night, happiness felt possible. Unfortunately, happiness attracted attention. Dangerous attention. A week later, Antonio discovered devastating news. Someone inside his organization had ordered the assassination attempt. Someone close. Someone powerful. Someone family. The investigation led to a single name. Vincent DeLuca. Antonio's uncle. The same man who publicly mocked Naomi. The same man who hated every reform Antonio introduced. The same man who viewed Naomi as unacceptable. Antonio felt sick. Because Vincent wasn't finished. Evidence revealed something even worse. Naomi remained a target. Not because of who she was. Because she mattered to Antonio. And anyone who mattered to Antonio became vulnerable. For years he had feared exactly this. Now it was happening. The nightmare he spent his life avoiding. The woman he loved was in danger because of him. That realization shattered him. And forced him toward a decision that would break both their hearts. 3 days later Antonio invited Naomi to the penthouse. She arrived smiling. Hope shining in her eyes. The sight nearly destroyed him. Because he already knew what he had to do. Naomi immediately sensed something wrong. What happened? Antonio couldn't look at her. The silence stretched painfully. Finally he spoke. We can't do this anymore. The words felt like knives. Naomi stared at him. What? You need to stay away from me. Confusion became hurt. Then fear. Antonio. I'm serious. Her heart began breaking. Right there. In real time. Why are you doing this? Antonio forced himself to remain cold. Because warmth would weaken his resolve. And weakness could get her killed. You deserve a normal life. That's not your decision. It is when your life is in danger. The truth slipped out. Naomi froze. The pieces suddenly connected. The threats. The investigations. The tension. Tears filled her eyes. You don't get to decide for me. No. His voice cracked. But I can protect you. And what if I don't want protection? Antonio finally looked at her. Pain filled his eyes. Raw. Unfiltered. Devastating. What if losing you would destroy me? The confession hung between them. Beautiful. Heartbreaking. Too late. Because love had arrived. And now circumstances were tearing them apart. Naomi left without another word. Antonio watched her walk away. And for the first time in years, the powerful Antonio DeLuca felt completely powerless. Have you ever loved someone but felt circumstances were pulling you apart? What happened? Share your experience below. The weeks after their separation became the longest of Antonio DeLuca's life. Chicago's winter deepened. Snow piled against sidewalks. Lake Michigan disappeared beneath gray skies. And every day felt colder than the one before. Antonio buried himself in work. Meetings. Investigations. Security operations. Anything to avoid thinking about Naomi. Nothing worked. Because everything reminded him of her. The coffee shop where they once shared an early morning conversation. The community center where children still asked about him. The bookstore where she had challenged him with that sharp smile. The memory followed him everywhere. One evening Marco found Antonio sitting alone in his office long after midnight. You look terrible. Antonio barely looked up. I feel worse. Marco sat across from him. You love her. It wasn't a question. Antonio closed his eyes. For years he had denied countless emotions. This one was impossible to deny. Yes. The admission felt strangely liberating. Painful. but honest. Marco leaned forward. Then why are you acting like a man preparing for a funeral instead of fighting for the woman he loves? Antonio laughed bitterly. Because fighting for her is what put her in danger. No. Marco shook his head firmly. The people threatening her put her in danger. The words lingered. Because deep down, Antonio knew Marco was right. For too long he had confused protection with distance. For too long he believed love required sacrifice. Maybe love required courage instead. And Antonio DeLuca had spent years being brave in every area of life except the one that mattered most. Across the city, Naomi was fighting her own battle. The heartbreak hurt more than she expected. Not because Antonio had ended things. Because she understood why. And understanding somehow made it worse. Every part of her wanted to hate him. To blame him. To move on. But she couldn't. Because she knew what she had seen in his eyes that night. Love. Real love. The kind that terrified people. The kind that changed lives. The kind worth risking everything for. Still, Naomi refused to sit around waiting. She had spent too much of her life placing her happiness in other people's hands. Not anymore. For the first time in years, she began making plans entirely for herself. She expanded programs at the community center. Applied for leadership grants. Started mentoring more young women. Focused on building a future she could be proud of. One afternoon, Brianna, the teenager she mentored, sat beside her after class. You miss him. Naomi nearly laughed. Is it that obvious? A little. Naomi stared out the window. Sometimes loving someone isn't enough. Brianna thought for a moment. Then said something surprisingly wise. Maybe. But sometimes people use that as an excuse because they're scared. The words stayed with Naomi long after the girl left. Because fear had controlled much of her life. Fear of rejection. Fear of disappointment. Fear of believing in something beautiful. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid. While Naomi focused on rebuilding her life, Antonio focused on ending the threat once and for all. The investigation against Vincent intensified. Evidence mounted. Financial records. Witness testimony. Hidden communications. Everything pointed toward one unavoidable truth. Vincent had orchestrated the assassination attempt. And he wasn't finished. The confrontation finally happened on a freezing February evening. Antonio entered an abandoned warehouse on Chicago's west side. The same kind of place where his father once conducted business. The same kind of place Antonio had spent years trying to leave behind. Vincent was waiting. The older man's expression carried no remorse. Only resentment. You chose weakness. Antonio remained calm. I chose a better future. Vincent laughed. A future with her? The contempt in his voice made Antonio's blood boil. For years he had tolerated his uncle's cruelty. No longer. Her name is Naomi. Vincent smirked. She's the reason everything changed. No. Antonio's voice grew stronger. She's the reason I finally saw what needed to change. The confrontation ended not with violence, but with justice. Federal authorities arrived. Evidence was delivered. Years of crimes finally caught up with Vincent. As agents led him away, Antonio felt something unexpected. Not victory. Relief. For the first time since inheriting the organization, he wasn't carrying the burden alone. The past was finally losing its grip. Now only one thing remained unfinished. Naomi. 3 weeks later, the entire city gathered for the grand reopening of the South Side Community Center. Thanks to anonymous donations, the facility had been completely renovated. New classrooms. New equipment. Expanded programs. Hundreds of families attended the celebration. Children laughed. Music played. Hope filled the building. Naomi stood on stage preparing to thank donors and volunteers. She believed the anonymous benefactor wanted privacy. She was wrong. Halfway through her speech, movement near the entrance caught her attention. The crowd began whispering. Turning. Watching. Antonio DeLuca had arrived. Dressed in a simple dark coat. No entourage. No bodyguards visible. No public relations team. Just Antonio. Her heart immediately forgot how to behave. He walked slowly toward the stage. The crowd parted naturally. Everyone seemed to sense something important was happening. When Antonio reached the microphone, silence fell. Complete silence. His eyes found Naomi's. And never left them. Then he began speaking. Several months ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. The audience listened carefully. I hurt someone who deserved respect. Naomi's breath caught. Antonio continued. I allowed fear to speak for me. His voice remained steady. But today I refuse to let fear make another decision. The room felt frozen in time. Every person watching understood this was no ordinary speech. Antonio stepped closer to Naomi. Close enough for her to see emotion shining in his eyes. I spent years believing love made people vulnerable. He smiled sadly. Then I met a woman brave enough to risk her life for mine. Tears gathered in Naomi's eyes. The audience remained completely silent. No one wanted to miss a single word. Antonio took a deep breath. Then finally said everything he should have said from the beginning. I don't care what anyone thinks. His voice echoed through the room. I don't care about gossip. I don't care about expectations. I don't care about the opinions that once controlled me. His eyes never left hers. What I care about is you. Naomi's heart shattered and healed at the same time. Because every word felt true. Painfully true. Beautifully true. Antonio stepped onto the stage. Now standing directly in front of her. No barriers. No distance. No fear. Just honesty. Raw and undeniable. I love you, Naomi. The words landed softly. Yet somehow carried the weight of a lifetime. Tears slipped down Naomi's cheeks. Antonio continued. I love your kindness. I love your strength. I love the way you help people. I love the way you see goodness where others see problems. His voice trembled slightly. The crowd watched, completely captivated. And I love the woman who taught me that protecting someone isn't the same as pushing them away. Naomi pressed a trembling hand against her mouth. Antonio's eyes filled with emotion. I was wrong. The confession came without hesitation. I was wrong when I hurt you. I was wrong when I let fear control me. And I was wrong when I believed you would be safer without me. For a moment, neither spoke. The room felt suspended between heartbeats. Then Antonio whispered the most vulnerable truth of all. I don't want a life without you. The silence broke. Not from the crowd. From Naomi. Because she was crying openly now. Not from sadness. From relief. The kind of relief that arrives after carrying pain for far too long. Naomi took a slow step forward. Then another. Until only inches separated them. Antonio looked terrified. Not of rejection. Of hope. The same hope he had spent years avoiding. Naomi smiled through tears. You talk too much. Laughter rippled through the audience. Antonio laughed too. The tension eased. Just enough. Then Naomi touched his face gently. A gesture filled with forgiveness. Understanding. Love. You hurt me. Antonio nodded immediately. I know. I was angry. I know. You broke my heart. Pain flashed across his face. I know. Naomi smiled softly. But unfortunately. Antonio held his breath. I love you too. The crowd erupted. Cheers. Applause. Happy tears. But neither of them noticed. Because the only people who existed in that moment were each other. Antonio pulled her into his arms. Carefully. Tenderly. As though holding something priceless. Their kiss was everything the first one wasn't. Certain. Passionate. Unapologetic. A promise of forever. When they finally pulled apart, both were laughing and crying at the same time. The future suddenly felt possible. Not perfect. Not easy. But possible. And sometimes that's all love needs. Later that evening, they stood together beside Lake Michigan. The same city lights stretched across the water. The same skyline glittered in the distance. Months earlier, both had stood alone beneath those lights. Lonely. Wounded. Certain happiness belonged to someone else. Now everything felt different. Antonio wrapped an arm around Naomi. She leaned against him comfortably. No walls. No fear. No pretending. Funny, Naomi said softly. What? I used to sit by my apartment window and wonder what it felt like to be chosen. Antonio kissed her forehead. And now? She smiled. Now I know. Antonio looked out across the city. Then back at the woman who had changed everything. For the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. They felt home. What do you think is the most important ingredient for lasting love? Trust, loyalty, communication, or forgiveness? Tell me below. Spring arrived in Chicago with surprising warmth. Trees along the lakefront swayed gently in the breeze. Outdoor cafes filled with laughter. Families crowded the parks. And for the first time in many years, Naomi Carter woke each morning with peace in her heart. Not because life had become perfect. Because she no longer faced it alone. 2 years had passed since Antonio stood on that stage and publicly declared his love. 2 years since they stopped letting fear make decisions for them. 2 years since both finally chose happiness. The transformation had been remarkable. Not just in their relationship. In themselves. Naomi stood in the kitchen of a beautiful brownstone overlooking a quiet Chicago neighborhood. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Fresh coffee filled the air. From the dining room came the sound of laughter. Her laughter. Antonio's laughter. The kind of ordinary moment she once believed belonged to other people. The kind she secretly dreamed about during lonely nights spent staring out apartment windows. Now it was her reality. And sometimes she still struggled to believe it. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist. Antonio. His chin rested lightly against her shoulder. You're smiling. Naomi laughed softly. I know. You do that a lot now. She turned toward him. The familiar sight still made her heart skip. Not because he was handsome. Though he certainly was. Not because he was powerful. Though everyone knew he was. Because she knew the man beneath those things. The man who learned vulnerability wasn't weakness. The man who fought for love when walking away would have been easier. The man who chose her every day. Antonio kissed her forehead. A small gesture. Yet somehow still her favorite. Big day today. Naomi nodded. It is. Today marked the grand opening of the expanded Naomi Carter Community Foundation. A dream she once thought impossible. A dream Antonio never allowed her to abandon. The foundation had grown far beyond its original community center. What started as one neighborhood program now served thousands of families throughout Chicago. Scholarships. Job training. Housing assistance. Youth mentorship programs. Resources for single mothers. Educational support. The foundation became a lifeline for countless people. And Naomi became one of the city's most respected community leaders. Not because Antonio funded her work. Because she earned every bit of that respect herself. Antonio simply gave her the opportunity to dream bigger. To believe bigger. To stop shrinking herself to fit inside other people's expectations. The lesson changed everything. Years earlier Naomi believed her value depended on what she could do for others. Now she understood something far more important. Her worth existed independently of anyone's approval. That realization transformed her life. And helped transform the lives of thousands more. As guests arrived for the opening ceremony, Brianna stepped forward. No longer a teenager. Now a college graduate preparing for law school. The young woman hugged Naomi tightly. You changed my life. Naomi immediately shook her head. No. Brianna smiled. You taught me how to change my own. The words nearly brought Naomi to tears. Because moments like this reminded her how far she'd come. How far all of them had come. Antonio's life changed too. Perhaps even more dramatically. The DeLuca organization was no longer what it had once been. Years of reform transformed it into a legitimate business empire. The criminal elements that haunted previous generations had been dismantled. Removed. Left behind. The process wasn't easy. Some battles lasted years. Others nearly cost him everything. But Antonio never backed down. Because for the first time, he had something worth fighting for beyond survival. A future. A family. A life. The loneliness that once consumed him slowly disappeared. Not because Naomi magically fixed him. She didn't. Love doesn't work that way. Instead, she gave him the courage to face parts of himself he had spent years avoiding. His grief. His guilt. His fears. His belief that happiness wasn't meant for him. Together they learned something powerful. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually. Conversation by conversation. Choice by choice. Day by day. And that kind of healing lasts. One evening after the foundation ceremony, Marco joined them for dinner. The longtime friend smiled knowingly as he watched Antonio and Naomi together. You know, Marco said, for years I thought nothing could make Antonio happy. Antonio groaned. Naomi laughed. Marco ignored him. Turns out he was just waiting for the right woman. Antonio shook his head. No. Everyone looked at him. He smiled at Naomi. I was waiting to become the kind of man capable of receiving the love she offered. The table fell silent. Because everyone knew it was true. Life still surprised them. Especially when they least expected it. At 40, Naomi believed motherhood was no longer part of her future. She had accepted that possibility years earlier. Made peace with it. Then life decided to write a different story. A very different story. One autumn morning, she stood in the bathroom staring at a small white test. Completely speechless. Utterly shocked. And somehow laughing and crying at the same time. Antonio found her several minutes later. Immediately concerned. Naomi? She simply handed him the test. The powerful Antonio DeLuca stared at it. Blinking repeatedly. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then he sat down abruptly. Speechless. Which almost never happened. For several moments neither spoke. Then Antonio whispered. Are we sure? Naomi burst into laughter. The look on his face was priceless. 9 months later they welcomed a daughter. A beautiful little girl with Naomi's eyes and Antonio's stubborn determination. The moment Antonio held her for the first time changed him forever. Every wall. Every fear. Every defense mechanism. Gone. The sight brought tears to Naomi's eyes. Because she saw something she never thought she'd witness. Pure joy. Unfiltered joy. The kind Antonio spent most of his life believing he didn't deserve. Now it rested peacefully in his arms. Several years later, Naomi found herself standing beside a familiar window. Not the apartment window where loneliness once kept her company. A different one. Inside the home she shared with Antonio. Their daughter played in the backyard. Laughter drifted through the open patio doors. Antonio stood outside helping assemble a bicycle. Apparently some things never changed. The scene felt beautifully ordinary. And that made it extraordinary. Because years earlier Naomi sat alone watching distant lights. Wondering what it felt like to matter. Wondering what it felt like to be chosen. Wondering whether love still existed for someone carrying as many scars as she did. Now she knew the answer. The answer wasn't perfection. It wasn't fairy tales. It wasn't finding someone who never made mistakes. The answer was finding someone willing to grow. Willing to fight. Willing to stay. Someone brave enough to love honestly. And be loved honestly in return. Antonio looked up from the yard. Their eyes met through the window. The same way they had countless times before. The same way they would for years to come. He smiled. And Naomi smiled back. Because some people become your favorite place in the world. Antonio was hers. And she was his. Love rarely arrives when life is easy. Sometimes it appears after heartbreak. After disappointment. After years of believing happiness belongs to someone else. Sometimes it arrives when 2 wounded people least expect it. Not to rescue them. But to help them discover their own strength. Naomi and Antonio's story reminds us that healing is possible. That forgiveness can be powerful. That second chances exist. And that the right person won't erase your scars. They'll love you because of the strength you gained from surviving them. Most importantly, their story reminds us that no matter how lonely life may feel today, your chapter isn't finished yet. Sometimes the most beautiful parts of the story happen after you think all hope is gone. If this romance touched your heart, Please like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable love stories filled with passion, healing, redemption, and second chances. Every week, we bring you cinematic romance journeys designed to make you laugh, cry, hope, and believe in love again. And thank you for spending this emotional journey with us. What was your favorite moment in this story, and do you believe soulmates truly exist? Let me know in the comments below.